Welcome everyone to today's Finance Administrative meeting. If Krista could kindly call the roll for us, please.
Certainly, sir. Mr. Ames?
Here.
Mr. Alfred?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
I am here.
All present, sir.
Are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay, we have two sets of minutes to consider, one from our meeting on October 10th, 2022, and also October 18th, 2022.
Move adoption as written.
Being that two of our seated current members were not members of the F&A committee before, I will second that motion.
Thank you,
Two of
sir.
us will abstain.
And all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is appearance by citizens. Krista, do we have anyone signed up to speak this morning?
Yes, sir, we do. Mr. Hoagland has signed up to speak today.
Good morning. Alex, now that Council McCann, Lennox, and Harkins have been replaced and leave disgrace for their lies, corruption, and fraud, we fully expect new council members to abide by their campaign promises to be fully transparent, accountable, and approve, spend, and guard our hard-earned tax funds like their own. We will expect council to comply to my ATAX FOIA to see full accounting from the chamber and other nonprofits who were issued millions illegally under ATAX laws, and to also fully understand how and where all these millions were used under the law and disappeared with zero oversight or audits, including over $1 million to Canada. Let's make this nonprofit chamber issue a priority for 2023 since tax funds issued are so large. Let's also make this corridor plan a top priority and even more important to resolve soon. Then fix this chamber tax scam and fraud we have been dealing with for 35 years. Let's actually accomplish these important issues versus avoid them. Take a council vote ASAP and hold council members accountable and even liable if they keep knowingly voting for illegal use of our tax funds. Alex, to my knowledge, you are not a CPA, have no financial background, have no understanding of town audits and budgets, yet you vote in favor of millions of illegal funding to the chamber every year and many nonprofits to be illegally funded like the Boys and Girls Club for your friend Kim Likens, who stole $200,000 that you support. You also fund the illegal tax scam Low Country Golf Owners Association, controlled by Bill Miles, past ATAX Chair Brad Mayer of Palmetto Dunes, and Kerry Corbett Sea-Pines, violating IRS tax codes and ATAX laws. You have no knowledge of millions of legal fees overcharged by crooked town lawyers that exceed much larger cities like Myrtle Beach and Charleston. You have never asked or seen town accounting, town budgets, nor voted for a forensic audit on accounting prepared by CPA Troyer, Orlando, and past Steve Riley, who I contend have prepared fraudulent audits and budgets. Once the town and the chamber undergoes a forensic audit, I predict arrest, convictions, and prison. And one last thing, Alex, you were involved with the Greater Secret Island Council. Why? How did a native islander and only black man in this council and raised by a great mom and dad turn out to be so corrupted and dishonest? You have turned out to be an embarrassment for the honest native island community you represent, and I feel sorry for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland, for your comments.
That
Any
concludes
others?
appearance. No, sir, no others.
Thank you. And we would want to also recognize Councilwoman Bryson and Mayor Perry in attendance today. Welcome to the conversation. First order of business. Consideration of proposed amendments to provisions of Title 11, Chapter 1 of the Municipal Code for the town of Hilton Head Island to provide for a small and minority-owned business enterprise utilization program and a corresponding good faith effort program. And Mr. Troy, will you be making a presentation this morning?
Mr. Chair, if it's acceptable, we have our procurement officer here to just share a few comments about this.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Morning. Richard Groth, procurement officer for the town. A few months ago, I was tasked by administration to do some research and come up with some recommendations to have more inclusivity for small minority-owned businesses in our procurement efforts here at the town. So I went out and reached out to many local, county, city, state governmental entities, got materials from them, researched what their programs were, what they had in place, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and came up with a recommended utilization plan for the town to implement for that purpose of being more inclusive for small and minority-owned business. The key elements of that utilization plan were to enhance our proactive solicitation of those entities from available listings maintained by the town or other governmental entities and the Chamber of Commerce, requiring mandatory contractor participation in our good faith effort program for construction projects and documenting their efforts to partner with small and minority-owned businesses for inclusion in their bid submittals, identifying and promoting the use of those entities by town staff for smaller purchases versus the ones that I do through formal solicitation, and compilation of annual reporting to the town manager of our utilization data for those entities in our procurement process. Now, those are the points for the plan. So the good faith effort program for contractors kind of puts the onus on them to pre-bid, identify what efforts they're making to include those entities in their bid process, and then follow up to that on the tail end when they're awarded the contract. They have documentation requirements to document the utilization of those entities throughout the process through reporting to the project manager. There is an attachment to the information that was handed out for the utilization plan. The details are in that plan. The good faith effort program is also there. It gives you the documentation required of the contractors to submit on various projects that they bid on. I don't know if you have any questions in particular about this. That's what we have recommended.
Thank you. So what we'll do, we all have had an opportunity to review the materials in the packet. I'm sure there are questions that have come about. And staff, if there are questions that are coming that you can answer at the moment, please do so. And if not, just take note, okay? I see this as a work in progress, okay, to get to a point that this plan really tailors what we're looking for here on Hilton here, okay? So with that, I will start with Councilman Stanford. Any questions or comments you'd like to make?
Thank you. I think that this is a commendable effort. It's a good first start for us. It is certainly something that the town should be doing, that is trying to share business with small business enterprises as well as minority enterprises. One of my colleagues here, Mr. Ames, and I discussed this recently, and he points out that something is missing, and that is a focus on businesses, small businesses, minority businesses that are based on Hilton Head Island. So I think that should be a further thrust of this. I'm not claiming that's original with me at all, but it is something that is worthwhile. I think that we should amend this plan to include small business, minority business that is based and operating off of Hilton Head Island. But I think this is a great job, and I look forward to success as it moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Ames?
Yeah, Richard, good work. I have to admit that when I first started reading this, I said, this is the kind of document that gives government a bad name. But in giving it more and more thought, I realized that virtually every word in there serves a purpose. So on that score, I appreciate what you've compiled. Good research builds confidence, but I have a couple of comments that I'd like to make. I don't see in our document a purpose statement. What are we really trying to achieve? And more in layman's terms, what is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? And so I think that for the benefit of the community, not necessarily in your legal document, but let's describe what we're really trying to achieve. And part of that is some of the words that I picked out of this is provide access to capital and credit. In other words, we're giving people a leg up. Secondly, small businesses afforded the same participation opportunities as minority businesses. And then I add what I think is important to us as an island economy, local businesses recognized in the language. And I asked the question, what are Hilton Head Island's priorities? We're using the words minority business, small business, and I'm adding local business. And so at the state level, you might say they rank minority business a 4 and small business a 3, and they don't even talk about local business. And I'm questioning whether or not, and this is more of a policy question, whether or not in our community we ought to be ranking local business 4, small business 3, and minority business 2. And the reason I say that is that if we are providing capital and lending to a small business a local business in our community, we're leveraging dollars for our own economy's benefit. If it's a small business, those dollars are going to be leveraged even further. And of course, we want to provide the minority access to that capital and credit. And whether that's Hispanic, Gullah, woman, those aren't issues for me in this conversation, minorities. So I think that we ought to make sure that the language that we're putting in this document really serves Hilton Head purposes, not just a prototype that is replicated from other documents. One other thing that I picked up in some of the language that I was reading, is there any way that this community in this language can have a mentor-protege relationship? In other words, how do we mentor our students in our schools with proteges in our businesses? And do those businesses get any additional points for doing that? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Alfred.
I think this is generally a very good idea. I am interested in being able to determine at some point how we are doing and what in terms of goals in particular. I don't know if this assumption is correct, but do we have any type of statistics at present that indicate a base from which we can measure future progress? And if that's the case, I assume then that we would be waiting several years before we know how well we're doing.
That was one of the outcomes that we were hoping for, is to build a base of data from which future policy decisions can use that data. Right now, there is none, and this is a first step.
Thank you.
All right. One moment, Mr. Oldland. I want to make some comments myself, and then I'll go to the public. Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Just a few items I had on my list also for staff to recognize. I think that Councilman Ames is absolutely correct with the whole purpose statement. You know, that we developed that, and we really put emphasis on the local aspect of it. I'm not quite sure how we define local at the moment, but maybe it's a mile radius. Maybe it speaks to Hilton Head. I'm not quite sure. As I started to look at some of the links that you provided with other, I guess, directories of minority and small business ownership that are in the enterprise, it was heavy towards Columbia. And I'm not quite sure if that's because Columbia is the metro or because Columbia has a really good plan that they're currently using. And Columbia was not one of the entities that we had looked at as far as comparison. So I think we need to dive a little bit deeper into that. As far as Councilman Ames mentioned, the idea of, I guess, creating our our network of businesses here on Hilton Head, maybe through a mentorship program. I think the newly formed Community Development Corporation can absolutely help us with that exercise. And as we look at our ratio at our current school district, particularly here on Hilton Head, over 40% are Hispanics in our school system, right? So, creating a space of opportunity for sustainability on Hilton Head, I think is definitely important. So we're going in the right direction. So those were my comments to add along with the others that we've made here on the dais. And so I will, before I open it up to public comment, you want to? Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You indicated if staff might have some responses to questions today that
Sure,
it would be good to go ahead and bring them in. So
Sure.
a couple of things that I've heard that I think we can address at least while we're discussing this item. One is with regards to an emphasis on local businesses. Our existing procurement code already provides for a local business advantage. So we have language that's already built into the code that if you are a corporate headquarters or otherwise meet the definition of a local business that has a certain percentage of your workforce on the island, you already have advantages with regards to our procurement processes. Now, again, because if we're a government, a lot of times it comes down to who can deliver the best product or service for the lowest price, because we're always trying to keep in mind using taxpayer dollars wisely. But we have that built in terms of local preference into our code today. So that's why it's not in what is before you, because that language is already a part of our existing procurement regulations. When it comes to addressing a purpose statement for why we're doing this.
Can you hold off on that
Yes.
point, Josh? So the utilization plan would also apply to I guess bids that are not necessarily having to go through the procurement process at the department head level and so on, once we're under that threshold.
Yes, sir.
Would that apply to those decisions also?
It does.
Okay, all right.
We have guidelines that we provide to staff that says as long as it's within one of these buckets, here's how you should go about doing it. So for example, if it's below the small purchase threshold, you're supposed to try to find a local business that can provide that service first. If you can't, then it's okay to look elsewhere, but the guideline is you're supposed to look there first.
Okay.
When it comes to a formal bid process, now you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in a construction project, we have guidelines that set forth when we can utilize local preference and when we can't, to make sure that we don't wind up with a protest or somebody else from another business that says, this wasn't done according to the appropriate standards.
So Councilman Stanford had a question. I got you, Councilman Ames, next.
I'm hearing that there are two different policies, one that is proposed and one that's existing.
Yes.
Shouldn't they be harmonized and made into one?
Absolutely. And I just want to let you know why you didn't see anything about a local preference in here, and it's because we already have that in the code.
Okay.
What we don't have is this language, and that's kind of where I was going to in terms of why are we doing this? We're doing this because one of our strategic initiatives calls for us to research trends and implement best-in-class municipal service delivery. So when we look at our peer communities across the state and how they're going about acquiring goods and services for their local communities, we see that they consistently have something like this to identify small and minority businesses within their communities and to do the things that are called for in this plan, which are essentially not providing them an advantage over other businesses, but making sure that they're aware of the opportunities, making sure that they get notice of solicitations when they become available, and then making sure that contractors are utilizing, again, those types of firms to the greatest extent that they can when they're providing bids to us for certain projects. So because we've seen those in other communities, we believe that we need to look at including those within our code as well so that we are on par with our peer communities. So in terms of developing a purpose statement for why we're doing this, I would tell you that's the making of a purpose statement, and it's for us to make sure that we're delivering those best-in-class services.
But I do think it's worthwhile to come up with one
harmonize.
policy, large and small.
Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you.
Councilman Ames.
That's what I was going to say, and I'll emphasize the point. I think that when somebody is considering bidding on a project within Hilton Head, local participation is key, because that's how we leverage dollars in this
Absolutely.
community. And so I think it's right that the two policies that the proposed policy and the existing policy be amalgamated, and that people don't lose sight of the fact that local is key, small business is key, minority is key. Thank you. And just one other question. Does disadvantaged business enterprise enter into this conversation at all?
As which program?
Well, there are terms used in some of the information that I read, disadvantaged business enterprise. What is that, and does it apply to what we're talking about?
It does. So to your point, the language that's in there, and I specifically looked up the capital and credit language because I wanted to make sure it was clear and on the record. The town is not proposing to issue capital or credit to any business. That's not what is called for in this program. That's not part of our procurement process. What's spoken to of capital and credit are businesses that have historically not had access to those same markets, and therefore they're considered a disadvantaged business. So that's part of how that term is defined in identifying those types of businesses that exist that haven't had access to those resources. And if that business meets that qualification, then it's considered a disadvantaged business for purposes of qualifying for this policy.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You good, Mr. Alfred?
No further comments.
Okay. Before I open it up to public comment, I've already recognized the other council members. Councilwoman Becker, welcome to the conversation. Okay, any public comment on this topic? Mr. Hoagland.
I have not read the provisions, and it seems like this is a private sector initiative to me. You know, no matter how worthy, heartfelt, how great something is and how great it sounds, doesn't necessarily make it legal. The Supreme Court ruled that you cannot use any public funds for any kind of private purposes or initiatives whatsoever that does not benefit the entire public good, reason, and use. I think you need to get a legal opinion. I think what's going to happen this year with not only me, but a lot of people that are going to be coming forward, I'm not going to be the only one speaking this year, is we're going to want to know much more about how our tax funds are legally issued and how they're legally used, and we're going to be wanting to get some very full accounting, even some forensic accounting on all of this. We cannot continue to just hand out money and have no idea how it's used, where it goes, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the lawyers are going to have to chime in. As you know, a recent lawsuit was filed. There is going to be another lawsuit filed. Actually, there's going to be a number of lawsuits filed this year. But the recent lawsuit was the $2 million that this council approved for the dredging of Harbortown in a private gated community. This type of use of tax funds is illegal. That money needs to be returned to the taxpayers. And there's the chamber is another example. You cannot fund Bill Miles in the chamber when he tells you, hey, my use of funds is secret. It's none of your business. That's not going to be allowed anymore. We're going to have to see where that money went and if it was legally used. And if it was illegally used and even criminally used, there's going to be consequences for those involved. So I think that y'all have the knowledge. You're listening to people like me. We're educating you. And when you get educated and you knowingly just turn around and vote against the law, I think you need to be held liable for that. I think you're going to be held responsible for that. So I caution you, whatever you do this year, whenever you vote for tax monies used in any reason for any purpose, you got to make sure that it's legal. And you got to make sure that it's reported and you see all the receipts and invoices and you make people prove it. And you've got to have contracts. You've got to have recipient tax contracts that spell out that legal use and how that money must be reported. You folks up there must start thinking about this. Those days of just handing money, those days are over. You've got to end that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Prince?
I just have two very simple comments. One is if you don't know where you are, you don't know how you're going to get to your destination. So I would think that we should figure out our current procurement activities and see whether this is needed, because we may be doing things well enough or just not codified. And the second comment I have is, as a former small business owner, there were times when I would run into an opportunity that inherently had factors in it that required me to provide mostly financial stipulations that I couldn't meet as a small business owner, insurance requirements or bonding capability. So when we are writing our procurement contracts, I think we need to change that focus to ensure that we get the appropriate applicants that we're targeting if this program's going to be implemented. So just don't, I mean, we're going to need to be consistent. If this is what our goal is, then we have to assure that our practices on day-to-day procurement line up with that and don't artificially prohibit some valuable, especially local businesses, from being able to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we'll bring it back to the dais. Before we ask for wrap-up comments here, I just say that, you know, the way that we are situated as to items like this coming to subcommittee before they go to council, there's not necessarily opportunity for council to weigh in until it gets before all of us. But I would just offer up to my colleagues that if you have comments and questions, please bring them forth to us so that we can ask those questions on the next go-around on this topic, okay? Anything else? Mr. Stanford?
I think that we've given some comments. We have some ideas. We have some clarifications. We have an existing program which may or may not need to be harmonized with this. So I think you've heard the initial concerns of council, and we'll look forward to further reporting on this. Thank you.
Good? Steve?
Yeah, but a separate topic. In today's town council meeting, we're going to be reviewing amendments to the budget. It's significant dollars, and my gut is telling me that should have come before F&A for this committee's analysis and comments before it goes to town council. I don't know if that was an oversight because of the holidays, the transition to a new council, but it seems to me that it would be consistent with other practices in other committees if we did that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask staff to respond to that. And if we don't have any other comments on item 6A, I just ask staff to, of course, record what has been said by council and also public comment, and we'll have this item on our next agenda for an update, okay? Thank you. All right, now as far as the budget amendments that are on town council's agenda later this afternoon, can we respond to Councilman Ames' request as far as that concern, and if there's any timing issues associated with where we are on that?
There we go. All right. I think you can hear me. I have not traditionally brought a budget amendment. You know, my 2 years in, I haven't brought budget amendments through F&A, but if that's the will of council and desire of council in terms of process, we're happy to do so. I think a lot of good work is scrubbed and understood in committee. So if that's your direction, we can do that. Now, it complicates today. Mr. Troyer, I'm looking at you.
May I? I'm not suggesting that we change today. The agenda put the responsibility on all 7 council members to do the homework to get to a decision today. But I think from the standpoint of the future, when there are matters that deal with significant dollars, it probably makes sense and is consistent with other responsibilities of other committees to have it be before this committee. That would be my reaction as now serving on this committee.
Okay. We have not traditionally built the budget in Finance and Administrative Committee. as that recommendation. And so perhaps we can get together and just think through the process to build budget and then the process to amend budget with these heavier topics.
Sure, agreed, and we can make that part of policy. And so that's something that we can talk about through the budget process.
That was one councilman's opinion.
Is the amendment process, and just from a finance department perspective, we try to keep our budget amendments to a minimum, and so we try to keep them few, and just so it's a more clear decision for council.
Okay, so I guess my only other question is, we have not had that as a practice in the last 2 years. This is not necessarily something that we have to codify. We just have to have a discussion around if we, okay, fair enough. Okay, Councilman Ames, point taken. And because the amount of times that we experience budget amendments has been limited, I think it's of us to consider going in a different direction, particularly with some of the items. Maybe there are going to be a lot of questions along the way. And Mark has done a really good job with communicating with the entire council as we build budget. It's not a surprise by the time we get to actual council, which I think deems us not having to come through this committee to get to council on the actual budget. All right, so we'll talk offline about it and develop strategy moving forward. Thank you, Councilman Ames, for bringing that to our attention. Anything else? We're good on that? All right, we will move on to our next item, which is consideration of our proposed Finance and Administrative Committee meeting dates for calendar year 2023. Those dates are within our packet. Discussion on this topic.
Yes, sir. I find it awkward to have a meeting at 10 o'clock followed by a meeting at 3 o'clock. It leaves a hole in the middle of the day. I would suggest and I would move that we change the time for Finance and Administrative Committee meetings to 1 o'clock, assuming that those meetings are followed by a council meeting on that day. It makes the day flow better. So that is a motion that I would make. Otherwise, I approve of the dates.
Mr. Stanford has made the motion.
Second.
Second, okay. Discussion? If I had more free time and it was warmer, I'd really be a proponent of that because I can get golf in before we get to this meeting. But nevertheless,
Play fast.
yeah, right. Mr. Ames, do you have anything?
I don't feel strongly about this, but my reaction is that the sandwiching of this meeting between lunch and town council feels as though there may be an artificial or practical adjournment before all business is done. So I would, if we're really interested in maintaining 10 o'clock as the time, is there another day that makes sense? Is there an advantage to having this be on the same day as council? I don't know. I don't have answers to that. But.
Yeah, well, I will speak to, there's one practice I want to make sure that this committee implements, and that is agenda items that move from this committee to council. Okay, that will not happen, Mr. Ames, okay? And, giving us a 2-hour window, we'll just have to manage agendas to make sure that we've got appropriate time to talk through items in that 2-hour span.
If we were to have a very complex agenda with a number of items on there, I'm certainly not opposed to changing that normal 10 o'clock time, or 1 o'clock time, assuming that this motion passes.
Okay. We ready for the question? Can you call a roll on it, please?
Yes, sir, I can. So just to clarify, this is a motion amending the start time for the meetings to be 10 a.m., otherwise approving the schedule as drafted.
Start time to 1 p.m.
Or excuse me, to 1 p.m. I'm sorry, my apologies, to 1 p.m. Otherwise, everything else states everything is okay?
You got it.
All right. Mr. Ames?
In the spirit of collegiality, I will vote yes.
Mr. Alfred?
Yes.
Mr. Stanford?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Support.
Motion carries, sir.
Thank you. There's no other business before this committee. We will find ourselves adjourned. Thank you, committee members, and thank you to the public for joining us today.